Hello and good morning, everybody around the world. And thank you for joining the last presentation today of our second webinar series of the Hoppy Topics. Today we talk about hopping regimes for various beer styles. This is a very practical topic from the perspective of a brewmaster. My name is Frank Pfeiffer. I'm the technical director here at Hopsteiner in Germany. And for everybody who's joining us for the first time today, I would like to give a very short introduction. Our webinar is a free online seminar with presentations about various hop-related topics. All of us have limited possibilities to travel and meet each other. And for there, we would like to additionally offer this kind of online support. In this way, we want to stay in contact with our customers and keep you up to date about latest information. Before we start with our presentation today, I would like to point out that we will be happy to receive your questions and your comments as well. As usual, both your microphone and camera remain switched off during the webinar, but you can address your questions through the Q&A tab in the control panel anytime. I will pick up your questions at the end of the presentation, so roughly in about 30 minutes. In total, the presentation and the following Q&A session will take about 1 hour. The session will be closed at 11:30 at the latest. So I'm very happy to present our presenter today. That is my colleague Mathis Geserer, and he's the responsible plant manager in our Hopsteiner Research Brewery. Mathis Geserer entered the brewing world in 2006 when he started his apprenticeship to become a brewer and a maltster. After succeeding in this task, he started a degree at the Technical University of Munich, and later he switched to the Hochschule Weinstefan Triesdorf to become an engineer of brewing and beverage technology. In his practical semester, he joined Hopsteiner and stayed there as a working student until he received his degree. During this period, he was supporting the technical department of Hopsteiner in Germany and performing the practical part of small-scale trials. After finishing his bachelor thesis, he had the opportunity to look into several departments of the company and started to work in the sales and technical department and as a support to quality management. Apart from these functions in the sales department, since 2018, he is brewmaster of the Hopsteiner pilot brewery and in charge of planning the practical part of trial setups and performing brewing trials. So Mathis will share us his practical experiences when talking about hopping recipes of various beer styles. I'm sure he will give a lot of inspiring ideas now how to create new recipes and what's to consider when choosing varieties, products, and techniques as well. So Mathis, it's your show now.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, good morning to everybody around the world. As Frank already said, we're gonna have a look at the question today, how to adjust hopping to a certain beer style, hopping regimes and recipes for various beer styles. So today's agenda is how to hop a beer true to the style. This begins with which product to use at which time or which point of dosage. So we're gonna have a look at when are we able to add hops to a brew in the whole brewing process. We're gonna talk about suitable standard products for the several points of dosage. We're not going to go into any isomerized or reduced products, or without one exception, where we're not going to talk about downstream too much, because this is more or less presentation for, I'd say, craft brewers to middle-sized brewers. I think big breweries will maybe be able to take some inspiration out of the hopping recipes as well, but it's mainly focused on small to mid-sized breweries, I guess. I'm going to give you suggestions for hopping German-style Pilsner, a Bavarian wheat beer, lager, and an IPA. And for every beer style, I'm going to give you, more or less two ways of tackling the beer style and approaching the beer style or the hopping of the beer style. So first of all, let's have a look at the brewing process. We start with the kettle. We can add hops at the first wort, or we can add hops begin of boil, mid boil, end of boil. All of that happens in the brewing kettle. Oh, pardon me. Let's genau das. Pardon me, we'll be back in a second. So, guess we're back now. We've already hit the kettle. We can add hops in the whirlpool as well. We could add hops between whirlpool and the cooler, which usually happens in a hop bag. We can add hops in the cold part of the brewery at the beginning or mid of end of main fermentation. We can dry hop during the lagering, so after main fermentation is finished. And the only downstream products we're going to talk about more or less are our hop oils type Noble and Noble Plus, which you could end prior to filtration. Yes. So now we're going to talk about suitable standard products for the hot part of the brewery. In the first wort, begin of boil, we can add raw hops, we can add pellets of any kind, we can add hop flow, which is more or less a CO2. It is a CO2 extract that is pourable at room temperature, so you don't need to preheat that, which is convenient for breweries that don't have the equipment to preheat their CO2 extract to get it pourable or flowable or pumpable. So you can add the hop flow directly out of the bottle. You just weigh out how much you need, and then you can pour it into your brew. Another option would be total resin extract. With total resin extract, which is actually ethanol, ethanol hop extract. It's not just as in pure resin extract, CO2 extract. It's the total resin extract. So you bring in all bitter, properties of your hop. Mid or end of boil. Here it's only raw hops and pellets, more or less, because extract would take too much time to get into solution in your wort, so you're not really able to add any extract here. Same is for the whirlpool. I would not recommend to use raw hops in the whirlpool because that could lead to some problems.
Matthias, I have to interrupt you, excuse me, but looks like that we still are in the slide number 4, doesn't switch forward. Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, it's live and we have a technical problem. Please stay online, we will try to solve it.
Okay. It's shared. At least it says it's shared. Now we're in the presentation. Shall we restart it? Pardon me for that. Fine, good. So we're in the hop part. We already had that. Hop part of the brewery, the first wort, begin of boil. I already told you we could use raw hops, pellets, hop flow, CO2 extract, any kind of extract. Mid or end of boil and whirlpool. The products that are usable are lesser. In the mid or end of boil, we could still use raw hops. We could still use pellets. In the whirlpool, we usually only use pellets because the whirlpool load would be too big using raw hops, and you could get problems sucking raw hops into your wort cooler, and I guess that's a problem that we would all like to avoid. Further, we could use a hop bag between the whirlpool and the cooler. Depending on the construction of a hop bag, you have the possibility to either use raw hops or pellets. depending on the thief size of that hop bag. Yeah, again, we try to avoid to suck any plant material into the wort cooler. In the cold part of the brewery, we could dry hop during main fermentation, in the beginning of main fermentation, mid fermentation, end of main fermentation. We can use raw hops there, pellets of any kind, T45, T90, lupulin enriched pellets, lupulin powder even, or any comparable products. Also, we have the possibility to use our hop oils type dry. Apart from Germany, we're not allowed to use that here because of Reinheitsgebot. But it's an option for everybody that is not affected by the Biersteuergesetz. During lagering and maturation, we pretty much have the same opportunities, and in downstream area we could use hop oils type Noble and Noble Plus. Those are in standardized products. They have a certain linalool content. Type Noble is a 10% linalool. Type Noble Plus is a 20% linalool. The hop oils type dry resemble the composition of hop oils in raw hops, for example. So that's why you use them at the same point as you would use raw hops or pellets. So the aroma gets shifted to where it would be if you used raw hops or pellets. Here's a short overview on guide values for isomerization rates. That's from our experience. Thanks, Willy Mitter, for that. He started with this and brought this in. And we confirmed those values in our pilot brewery. As you see, with increasing boiling time, obviously the yield of isoalpha increases. You can see here that extract needs some time before it really starts to get off with the yield. So after, I'd say 40 minutes or something, it slowly reaches the yield that you have with pellets. So if you add mid-boil, your yield would actually be better with pellets than with extract, because the time just is not enough. So the extract gets fully yielded. In addition to that is the whirlpool yield, isoalpha yield for pellets. We usually don't use extract in the whirlpool. That's why there's only pellets. You have several opportunities or possibilities to add to do whirlpool dosages. Either you just knock out your brew and have your hot wort and add in the whirlpool and add the pellets there, or you cool it down. We'll get back to that later when we talk about the IPAs. You could cool down your whirlpool to around 85 degrees. By that, you kind of cancel out isomerization and maybe slightly increase your aroma yield as well. So yeah, we'll get back to that later, why that is important. Let's start with a very popular beer style in Germany, at least, German style Pilsner. Some key data on that. Original gravity reaches from around 11 to 13 plateau. Alcohol level is mid I would say, 4.8 to 5.5, so roughly around 5% by vol. IBUs reach from 28, officially 30, but in Germany at least. But yeah, they reach from 28 to around 40. They could reach up to 45 as well. You find some Pilsners that only show 25 as well. Depends on the body of the beer. Beer color is very pale. We're around 6 to 8 EBC, so it's mostly Pilsner malt or comparable pale malt that is used there. And it's usually high attenuated, so there's not a lot of malt body going on there. This beer style lives from the hop, meaning it lives from the bitterness that comes from the hop, and it lives from the bitterness and the aroma that comes from the hop. It's a all-around hop-based beer style, in my opinion. The bitter profile is usually strong. Actually, it's generally strong. Doesn't mean it's a harsh bitterness, but it's there. It's what is important in this beer style. So it's actually always a strongly perceptible bitterness. and it may vary from a smooth and broad bitterness to an intense lean. So you have an upfront bitterness that is strong from the beginning and then slightly goes off, or you have a smooth broad bitterness that, yeah, kind of leads you through the every sip, and you have it in your mouth for the whole time, and it's a fine thing to have. The aroma, it's usually Pilsners have a mid to high hop aroma. There are Pilsners on the market which don't show significant aromas or hop aroma, but yeah, if you keep it true to the style, you actually have at least a mid hop aroma, I guess. And due to the low-key malt profile, this aroma is mostly the focal point of the beer style. Let's talk about the hopping regimes we could use there. Either we focus on the bitterness, so maybe we will add some aroma, but it's not the focal point of our hopping regime. Then that works well if we work with 100% Pilsner malt bill, which will be highly attenuated. So we have a very, very small malt body. At the beginning of boil, we would adjust the basic bitterness. So we would add around roughly 50 to 70% of the target IBUs in the beginning of the brew, at the beginning of the boil or in first wort, whatever you would like to choose. You could use extracts and pellets as well. Depends on your subjective opinion, or which you like best actually. Same goes for the varieties. You could use bitter varieties. You could use noble aroma hops as well, depending on how you would like your beer to turn out. Rest of the target IBUs might be split between mid to the end of boil by 20 to 30%, depending on how much of the IBUs you brought in the beginning. You could split it between mid and end of boil, or instead of end of boil, or additionally work something through the whirlpool as well, where you could add a top note flower, like hop flower, onto your beer. So yeah, you see the ratio here. That's what we usually work with. I'd go for 50, 30, 20. Usually that's what I work with most of the time, because I think it provides a very smooth and round bitterness. Yeah. The later the dosage will be put into your brew, obviously, the lower the yield of the isoalpha will be. So that's why we added the table with the yields. And as I already said, I prefer the usage of noble aroma hops, but you could work with bitter hops in the beginning as well. Just the later the dosage comes, the more sense makes a usage of noble aroma hops instead of bitter hops, just to provide some aroma. Another hopping regime we could go for here is a focus aroma hop regime. That suits more full-bodied Pilsner beer styles. Let's say 5 to 10% Cara, not as highly attenuated. You might go to 75 to 80% final attenuation. And as I already mentioned, like 5 to 10% of pale caramel malt, like Pilsner Cara, or just a Helles Cara malt. I would start this with a whirlpool dosage. I start the calculation from the back of the brew, actually. I try to bring in 50 to 100 microgram linalool per liter. I usually aim for around 70 microgram linalool per liter, which you could calculate through a whirlpool yield of around 80% of linalool, which you get out of your hops if you put it into the whirlpool at 90, 95 degrees if you don't cool it down. It's usually around 80%. By that addition, you not only add the linalool, but also IBUs, obviously, because you still have an iso yield. And you need to consider that when you are calculating the boiling dosages, obviously, and the rest of the IBUs need to be done there. So if we talk about 70 microgram linalool per liter and use our hop Akoya, for example, we would end around roughly 12 bitter units, which we already do in the whirlpool. So if we would like to have 35 IBU in a final brew, we add in the whirlpool 12 bitter units, then we have to add another 23 bitter units throughout the boil. I would split those bitter dosages again to 2 to 3 dosages throughout the boil to provide a smooth and broad and wide bitterness. Ratio begin of brew to mid of brew to end of brew would be 50, 30, 20, something like that. And if you only do 2 dosages, I would go for a 70 to 30 begin to end of boil, or 60 to 40, something around that. So that was my approach for a Pilsner. Now let's have a look at the Bavarian wheat beer. Some key data again: original gravity reaches from 11 to 14 degree plateau. Alcohol level is roughly the same as with the Pilsner, so around 5. IBUs go from 10 to 15, we're significantly lower than with the Pilsner. The color is around 6 to 18 EBC. It's usually kind of pale, except if you go for a dark or like an amber wheat beer, which are a thing as well. But then you have a completely different malt bill, and then you want to have adjust the IBUs to a higher level, so it smooths out. But yeah, those beers usually are mid to high attenuated as well. Hops are only a side notice here, because the esters and phenol from the fermentation dominate the beer style. Like the yeast-derived aroma is way more important than hop aroma here. Actually, left it again. I hate this thing. Pardon me again. I need to go back to our Bildschirmpräsentation. Was ist das jetzt? I think we're good to go again. The Bavarian wheat beer shows a bitter profile that is very flat, almost no bitter profile from the hops. But when you calculate your bitterness or the bitter dosages, you have to take into consideration that there will be yeast-derived bitterness with influence on the overall bitterness, because you bring in a lot of haziness with the yeast, and this yeast that is still in the final beer will also provide some bitterness. If we have a look at the aroma, there's no too slight hop aroma in a classic wheat beer. That can be, what you can do is use a hopping dosage at the end of the boil or in the whirlpool, or even with dry hopping as a support for the fermentation derived aromas, which we already talked about, the esters and phenol that come from the yeast. My approach for a classic wheat beer would be a begin of boil dosage of 60 to 100% of the target IBUs. All varieties and products are suitable. Again, you could work with pretty much anything which you think is most convenient. You can use extract as well as pellets. Raw hops, I think raw hops don't make too much sense here, because yeah, they only bring problems in the later brewing process. You have some options to supple with supplement dosages like late or whirlpool addition, or a slight dry hopping dosage to support the aromas from the fermentation. For example, by bringing in floral fruity aroma with the terpene alcohols derived from the hops. So you use fruity or maybe floral varieties, and you use them in the whirlpool. And since in the whirlpool, mostly the terpene alcohols will get into your final beer, because everything else does not really solve in there or gets evaporated, you could, yeah, add a top note onto your beer, or a supportive note at least. Later whirlpool dosages are very convenient for masking the wort character, for example, of alcohol-free or low alcohol level beers. That's a trend we've seen recently. A lot of craft brewers and even mid-sized or even big-sized breweries start to work with stopped fermentation, like yeast with low alcohol tolerance, and yeah, they brew beers at low level alcohol or even alcohol-free. A big problem is, and will always be, with a stopped fermentation, will always be the worty character of such beers. To kind of cover that, you could add, obviously you could add dry hopping rates and I don't know, add fruitiness and even floral character, big problem you have there is that the hop creep effect comes into. We will talk about that later at the New England IPA. Yeah, that's a problem that might be caused through dry hopping with an alcohol-free beer, and yeah, to avoid that, it is very convenient to use late hopping or whirlpool dosages if you go for an alcohol-free beer or no alcohol beer instead of dry hopping them. Our approach at a lager, let's get some key data for Helles. In Germany, it's all malt. You don't use raw grain. We will talk about rice beers and something like that as well. But let's start with the all malt. Original gravity again, 11, 2, 13, something like that. It's a classic full beer. Alcohol around 5% again. It's very comparable. IBUs reach from 15 to 25. 25 is quite high for a Helles, but depends on the character of the malt body. Some beers can endure the bitterness of 25 IBU. Color is around 8 to 11 EBC, so it's obviously it's called Helles, so it should be pale. Mid to high attenuation level. Hops, again, a side note is the malty character dominates the beer style. It's not a yeasty character, it's not a hoppy character. Helles or German lager beers mostly, German helle lager beer mostly live from a malty character. Bitter profile, almost no perceptible to slight bitterness. Hop aroma is non-existent to very reserved. So you see, what do we do to hop such a beer? What can we do here? If we work with a Munich Helles, for example, I start with a dosage at the beginning of boil of 50 to 100% of the target IBUs. You have optional dosages which you can use in every brew, in every beer style, actually, mid boil and end boil. That's always more a subjective thing. The maltier the beer profile is and the lower the final attenuation, so the sweeter and fuller the body of the beer is, the higher target IBUs are allowed, and the broader bitter profile could be without affecting the overall character of the beer. It will just bring a better ratio to your beer, but it won't be too bitter because the sweetness still is on top and the full body is still on top, but you give that like a counterpart by adding more IBUs and adding a broader bitter profile. So it will be a more full-bodied beer overall in the end. So for a strong multi-Helles, I would aim for 23, around 23, 22 IBUs, I guess. The bittering profile might be affected if you split the bittering again in 2 to 3 dosages throughout the boil, and the ratio which I would aim for you can find here. So it's like begin of boil, mid of boil, I would go 50-50, 60-40 maybe. Yeah, so that's what we go for with 23 IBUs. That is for a very strong or multi-Helles. That works with the bock as well, but then I would adjust the IBUs to 20, 28 maybe, up to 28. Lean, yeah, a lean but accentuated bitter profile. Yeah, begin of boil to mid of boil, 80 to 20. So we put more of the IBUs that we aim for in the beginning of the boil and lower the later dosages. If we talk about an international lager, as I already mentioned, I would start kind of the same way. We go for 50 to 100 IBU at the beginning of the boil with the target IBUs. Optional dosages, again, same as with the Munich Helles, but and again, if you have a maltier profile, you might reach for higher IBUs. And if you have a bigger body and a lower final attenuation, you might again use a broader bitter profile. So up to here, it's kind of the same. It differs only in the total IBU you bring into, with even 8 to 15, I would say. I've seen like 8 or 9 IBU beers as well, containing rice or corn or sugar. So you don't have such a full-bodied beer. And the leaner the body of the beer gets, the lower you should aim with your IBUs to get a good ratio and a nice drinkability in your beer, in your final beer. I would highly recommend for such beers to use noble aroma varieties, maybe pellets or even total resin extract, to bring in everything that the hop provides in bitterness and to bring a smooth bitterness instead of a harsh, heavy bitterness that's just upfront and will, that might destroy the character of such a light beer and eventually even worsen the drinkability. And that's not what we aim for, obviously. Beer should be drinkable or pourable. Let's talk about an IPA now. I'm going to start with the West Coast IPA, which is more or less, at least in Germany, more the classic IPA style, the one we've got confronted with first. Originally, gravity reaches from 14 to kind of 18, sometimes even higher. If you go to imperial IPAs or double IPAs or whatever, there's actually no real borders, but that's like what we can aim for right now. They'll live around 6 to 7.5, so it's quite high. In Germany, we would say it's a bock. The IBUs reach from 50 to 70s actually to low. I've seen 90 or 80 IBU beers as well. As long as the body works, the malt body is enough and big enough, you can go up to 80, 90 as well. But from then it gets ridiculous in my opinion, because you don't test anything else than bitterness, which is not too much fun. Except for your customers like that, so then go for it. The color reaches from 12 to 24 ABC, so usually it's quite pale, but it might be a bit darker to amber or brownish. Mostly mid to high attenuated, except if we talk for like imperial IPAs or Russian imperial IPAs or whatever. Even they are quite high attenuated, but due to the high alcohol level, obviously not as high attenuated. You have a very, very full body. Or dark IPAs, you have very full bodies if you use caramels in there, dark caramels, stuff like that. Here, the hop bitterness meets a malty body. So you have an intense hop bitterness meeting a malty body, and then on top you put the dry hop, the intense dry hop derived aroma. So you have the most of all worlds, if not the best of most worlds, of all worlds in the beer profile. Bitter profile is strong, distinctive. It's a full-bodied bitterness. It stays in your mouth. It will be there up front, and it will stay in your mouth. But it shouldn't be too harsh. We still would like to chuck down more than one of those beers. The aroma is an intense aroma profile, typical display of the utilized hop variety. That's what I've seen, at least in most West Coast IPAs, because they do usually use more late dry hopping dosages, and they don't. I'll get to that later. So it's a typical display of the utilized hop variety. It might be everything from resinous and dank and spicy to fruit bombs with some grassy flavors as well. It's literally only depending on your dry hopping and on the variety you use, or the combination of varieties you use, obviously. The hopping regime for a West Coast IPA would be 50 to 80 IBU, which you dose in a ratio of begin boil, mid boil, end boil 50, 30, 20. Again, that's my favorite distribution of hopping rates. It works with pretty much every style if you adjust it to the IBUs and use the proper product or the proper variety at least. You can shift that obviously as well. You can go for a 50-50 mid to begin of boil. You can go from 70 to 30 begin of boil, end of boil. All of that works. Just depends on how you would like to turn your beer out. And then you could add 1 to 2 dry hopping dosages of 500 to 1,500 gram per hectoliter each. 1 mid to end of main fermentation and 1 in the final attenuated beer. Why don't I add whirlpool hops? You could do that, but adding whirlpool hops will add linalool, geraniol, all of those terpene alcohols, already in the whirlpool. So the yeast, if it is capable of biotransformation, it will take those terpene alcohols and shift the character of the beer from a variety specific to a more fruity, juicy base. That's not what I aim for in a West Coast IPA, mostly. You could do that, obviously, but we will talk about that when we get to the second style of IPA we're going to talk about. That's why we add in the mid or end of fermentation, so we don't have biotransformation. There's not too much CO2 activeness going on, so we won't flesh out too many of the terpenes, like myrcene, caryophyllene, humulene, and others. and one in the final attenuated beer where you could add a variety-specific top note to your beer. You can do that with, for example, hop oils, or you can actually use pellets. You can actually, yeah, you can use pretty much everything that is either solid or liquid. With a big problem that, yeah, the more plant material you bring in, that's something you have to consider with dry hopping. The more plant material you bring in, the more beer losses you will have in the end. That's why I mentioned the hop oils. Those are an alternative that you could use to add a top note to your beer in the end without having any further beer losses. By avoiding the biotransformation, as I already mentioned, you have the CO2 washing out. Yeah, terpenes will not be washed out as much. So yeah, closer to the raw hop impression. If we talk about NEPAs or juicy IPAs, that's where we go a completely different way. We start with a dosage in the beginning of the boil of only 10% max of the target IBUs. That's actually just a handful of hops, so it doesn't foam over in the kettle. Because, I mean, the hop oils will stop the brew from foaming, and that's why you add this dosage. So the calculation you do is you have a whirlpool dosage, and if you have the possibility to do so, cool it down to 85 degrees, so you could add more hops without increasing the isomerization. You can use 80 to 90% of the target IBUs there, use geraniol rich and linalool rich hops in the whirlpool. By that, you will provide a good base for biotransformation with the yeast. You will add a smooth bitterness because, yeah, you don't have too much isomerization going on. So if you isomerize, I don't know, like we've talked about that before, 1 to 3% of the brought in alpha acid will be isomerized. And then you have like an analytical milligram iso alpha of, I don't know, maybe 20, 30. But in the end, the sensory bitterness will end up way lower because you have other bitterness providers as well. So you have an analytical bitterness of, I don't know, 60 IBU, but it will not taste as harsh because there's not as much iso alpha in there. It's a lot of IBUs that are derived, or analytical IBUs that will be derived from alpha acids and unspecific bitter components. Further, add 2 to 3 dry hopping dosages. That depends on, well, what you like to do there. If you would like a very fruity, juicy, intense aroma, go for a high addition in the beginning of the main fermentation, add another one at the end of main fermentation. By that, you add some variety-specific notes there because, yeah, in the beginning of the main fermentation, you have the base you brought in a whirlpool of the terpene alcohols. You add a lot of linalool and others on top by the first dosage in the main fermentation. Now biotransformation can do its thing. They will shift to more geraniol, more linalool. So geraniol gets shifted to linalool, citronellol, etc. And you will push your beer more to the fruity and juicy side. And then you put top notes by adding another dosage end of main fermentation, or even in the final attenuated beer, if you would like some more grassy flavor in there, add another dosage with a greener hop taste-wise in the last addition. Again, biotransformation and the CO2 wash will do their thing and will shift everything to the fruity and citrusy side. So that's a complete different approach to an IPA as it was with the West Coast IPA. You can combine those techniques we've talked about, you can combine those regimes. I tried to, yeah, to show you why I would do, how I would approach one of the beer styles, and yeah, you can make yourself, you can make the best of that for yourself and combine those regimes. You can either use only one of those, or maybe it helps you with problems you've already had or already seen. One more thing I would like to say about the dry hopping and the hop creep effect. Big problem with that is the higher the dosage you add, the more you bring in fermentable sugars, you bring in enzymes with the hops, and that's a big problem because first of all you might add more CO2 because the brew might start to ferment again. You might add more CO2, you might add and therefore cause gushing, and you might increase the alcohol level. Again, that's bad for alcohol-free beers and stuff like that. And even for if you already calculated and based your label of your beer on that, your alcohol content might differ from what you actually state on your label. So that's something you have to consider as well. Yeah. So I guess we're pretty much through for today. Or doesn't this thing work anymore? Yeah, yeah. So thank you for your kind attention, and I'm happy to take your questions now.
Yes, Matthias, thank you very much. That was a very nice presentation and a lot of information in between the lines. And but people have the chance to see it again. So to pick up the information, to go a little bit deeper into this, and we have seen there a lot of interactions of bitter compounds, of aroma compounds, depending on the beer styles, depending on the point of addition, and so on and so on. So it's a big story, a long story. You can talk here for hours, I know you, but yeah, we have a limited time. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me have a look now into the questions that are popping up. See a lot of questions coming up here, and so there's one from Stuart. He's asking, Matthias, which kind of hopping regime do you can recommend for a wheat beer bock with 1.08 gravity without a whirlpool addition?
Well, we talk about a wheat bock, so we're at high-level alcohol beers, and usually a full-bodied wheat bock, obviously. I would actually go for a smooth, bitter regime instead of aroma regime. If you don't use a whirlpool addition, you have the possibility, obviously, to go for a dry hopping addition or even add hop oils. But since you're not going to aim for a whirlpool addition, I think you would not like to add too much of aroma. So I would go for a bitter regime and start with 70% of the IBU you would like to bring in. If we talk about a wheat bock, you could go up to 20 IBU, I guess. That should not be a problem, but I would start with like 15 to 18 and work on that. Yeah, and then have the main dosage done with either total resin extract or maybe pellets, 70% of the IBUs, and then or 60, and then go for a mid addition of around 40. If you would like to add aroma without using the whirlpool, split it to 70, 20, 30, begin of boil, mid of boil, end of boil, and add a high oil variety, aroma variety at the end of the boil, 5 minutes before the end of the boil. By that, the evaporation of the hop oils won't be too bad and too intense, but you will still have, you will still have a nice aroma then. So 70, 20, 10 or 60, 20, 20 or 50, 30, 20, 30, something like that. Make most of the dosage in the beginning, add some in the mid, and then some more again in the end of the boil to add a slight hop flower if you would like to. If not, just get rid of the last dosage and use 2 dosages in mid and beginning of boil. That's pretty much what I would do.
Yes, you're right, Matthias. That's absolutely the thing that you have to do. And you know, the higher the gravity is, the stronger the beer is, the more bitter units the beer can handle. That's always the same. So have a look to the next question from Paolo, and he's asking, with beers with high additions of hops, it's preferable to add top notes like hop oils, because higher the hopping regimes, higher the beer losses. how to have a good compromise between these two methods.
Okay, with beers with high addition of hops, I prefer, yeah, okay. So your problem is you would like to avoid, more or less, you would like to avoid beer losses, which I think everybody would like to. If you have the possibility to use hop oils, I recommend to do dosage trials in the beginning, because that's nothing, you can work with hop oils straight away. That's something that needs intense trials to get where you would like to. But if you get there, it is a very, very nice to have thing, because it's very, as soon as you have your recipe with the hop oil, it's quite easy to dose. You don't have any beer losses with the hop oils. If you want to compromise, I would go for depending on the beer style. I mean, if we talk about dry hopping, or if you would like to just add a top note, that's I think that's the big difference. If you would like to go for dry hopping, I would not go for a exclusive hop oil addition. I would there add some hop oil in the beginning of fermentation or mid fermentation, and use in our case use the dry products variety specific, and add, if I would go for a variety specific beer, I would add the pellets for actually later on when it's already lagered, because yeah, it's easier to purge then, because we can cool it down easier. It's not as stuck with all the yeast that was in there before, and yeah, it gets smoother if you work like that. I would compromise like that. I think I would work as a dry hopping regime. I would first go with some oil, combine that already with pellets, and then add a slight dosage of pellets, maybe if I would like to add any more flavor. You could go for type dry oil as well, but the problem is they have high myrcene contents and high humulene contents, and if you don't have too many yeast activity going on, it will be very, very intense. You have to lager it longer so it gets more smooth. That's pretty much what I would do there. Yeah. And by that, you can obviously significantly drop your beer losses, because you don't bring in as much plant material. If we talk about just a top note, go for whirlpool dosage. If your whirlpool is fully loaded because you use pellets all throughout your whole brew, then get rid of some of the whirlpool dosage, and instead of that, take type Noble, for example, or Noble Plus, and add it prior to filtration in the beer stream before the filtration. Then homogenize your brew in a pressure tank, and you should end up with fine results as well, because that's a top note you can put on there. It's mostly linalool that brings the flavor, so it's more comparable to a late hopping dosage than if you go with dry. It's not comparable to a late hopping dosage. Yeah, by that you can significantly drop your beer losses.
Okay, Mattis, another question from Thomas. He's asking for the risk of hop creep. Is there any hop creep effect by using such high amounts of hops in production of New England IPAs?
Definitely. There's a big potential of hop creep with pretty much, it doesn't really matter on the beer style. I just mentioned the alcohol-free beers before, because it is a significant problem if you increase your alcohol level to above alcohol-free. That might cause several severe problems. But if you work with an IPA and dry hop insane amounts of hops, like 3 kg per hectoliter, throughout fermentation and lagering, that might. We've had that with our New England IPAs. Frank already mentioned it in one of his webinars this year. He talked a lot about NIPAs, so that's something you should maybe reconsider to look at. But what I can give you here is we've had alcohol increases by adding 3 kg. I guess it were 3 kgs, which we added through main fermentation and lagering. We had an alcohol increase of 1.5% by vol. So that's a lot. That's a big problem, obviously. And if you don't wait until, I mean, if your fermentation starts again because you have dry hopped as much, and the enzymes that you bring in with that restart fermentation, because your yeast suddenly has more sugar to ferment. And then you start to put that into the bottle, and you're not used to that. Even if you're used to work with bottle conditioning, if you don't put it through a pasteurizer, you will have problems with gushing. You will have problems with increased CO2 level. You will have problems with increased alcohol level. All of that might happen. So that's something you have to consider. Always doesn't matter which beer style. The more you dry hop, the more hop creep will be a problem, except for if you somehow pasteurize your beer before dry hopping it. But that's, well, not the best approach, I guess.
Thank you, Matthias. That was a very good answer on this. I have another question here from Paulo. His question is, in your opinion, what is the best hop varieties and regimes for non-alcoholic beer done by interrupted fermentation? Which hop aroma can mask the malty aroma from non-alcoholic beers? That's a very good question.
That vastly depends on how you would like to turn it out, your beer out. If you're talking about alcohol-free beers, you're talking about malty character. What can we do to support to mask a malty character? If you like to mask it, I would take out like a sledgehammer and add insane amounts of, I don't know, in the whirlpool, high geraniol content varieties. Talking about our varieties, we have like Bravo, which unfortunately has quite high in alpha content, but that works in the whirlpool. I've already done that, not with an alcohol-free beer, but with others. Bravo is something. You could use Lotus, you could use Sultana, you could use our new breeding variety from Germany, that's Solero, from Alex Feiner's breeding program. We've seen that thing has been used in alcohol-free beers actually. With stub fermentation as a late dosage, and that worked out quite well because it brings some fruitiness in there, and that goes well. Some red fruitiness, more or less. But you also could get some floral notes out of the Solero. That's it's an interesting hop at least, and I like to brew a lot with it. Just recently brewed a pale ale with that, with a whirlpool edition as well, a big whirlpool edition. And before dry hopping, it was already very, very intense regarding red fruits and also tropical fruits. So that's something you could do. Either you take the big sledgehammer and add a very, very intense profile, or instead of masking it, you work with the malty character and add like citrusy hops. I mean, there's a lot of classic citrusy hops. You could go for a Cascade, you could go for a Centennial or whatever. You can combine Cascades with lemon drop, for example, to push that. Bravo is very, very citrusy as well. That works out. That's varieties I would go for actually. Go for a high geraniol, go for a high linalool content. It doesn't make sense to work in that case with like classic aroma hops too much, because they have fine aroma obviously, but you need to, because the oil content compared to the alpha level is often shifted to the wrong side. So you have too much alpha for too less, or for not enough oil content. So you would have to dose intense amounts and even increase your whirlpool load and even increase your beer loss than there already in the whirlpool. So that's not really the best approach, I guess. Go for high oil content, high total oil content hops, and then decide if you will go for a more geraniol style or more linalool style or whatever. And there won't be too much of biotransformation with an alcohol-free beer because the yeast stops working quite quick, so you won't shift anything too far, I guess. That's my answer to that question.
Yes, and one additional answer from my side. Also regarding the hop creep effect when you are working on non-alcoholic beers, so be careful on this, that we do not produce any alcohol later on by dry hopping, that you are out of spec at the end in the bottle. So I have yes, another question from Paulo. Do you have some experience with dry hop beers aged in oak barrels? How do you think the development or aging of hop aromas?
I have not done barrel aging actually, but we've worked a lot with wood chips, just because yeah, it doesn't make we didn't have the space and the opportunities yet to get our hands on big oak aged barrels or whatever. But that's why we worked with wood chips and tried to combine dry hopping with wood chips. That's yeah, you will lose a lot of the hop aroma in the end if you work with a really wooden barrel. I mean, your losses are even higher because it's not an inert atmosphere. It's not like you don't have CO2 pressurized in there as you would have in a tank to keep everything together. You will have a lot of aroma evaporate through the top of the keg or of the barrel. And yeah, I guess the more you dry hop, the better. And I guess it might make sense to first have it in the keg and then maybe dry hop it again afterwards to add top notes of hops and of fresh hops. I mean, every aroma component will age and will get lost. That's not something that you only have in barrels. That's something you can watch when you fill your beer in bottles as well. A lot of aroma will evaporate over time if wrong stored, especially. It will evaporate through the cork. It will evaporate through the cap. The safest way to go, and even there you have a shifting in your aroma over time, is if you go with steel kegs or cans or whatever, because they're mostly yeah, let's say inert. So yeah, but if you go for wooden barrels where you age it in, that works, and you will still have some of the hop aroma, but most of the volatile components like the myrcene, the caryophyllene, everything that is not really soluble in the beer will be gone. So you will end up with a, I guess, mostly terpene alcohol, at least from what we are able to analyze by now. There will be a lot of terpene alcohols instead of more volatile components. So you will definitely smoothen out the profile over time. But as I said, I haven't used barrels myself. I only work with wood chips yet, with toasted wood chips, oak mostly.
Yes, that's right. And another comment from my side on this topic is, or this question, the utilization of dry hopping and also the application of barrel aging at the same time. That is, let me say, counterproductive, because what you want to achieve with the wood, you destroy in the heart of the hop aroma. So what you can do is that you do one after another, that you make your barrel aging first, and then you will do something like dry hopping, or you use hop oils, and you have to be very careful to find the right variety, because anything that has something in common with citrusy aroma, that is completely on the wrong side in combination with barrel aging. So have an eye on this. So that is a big story or long story, and yeah, to find a good result, a good solution in beer combination with dry hopping and barrel aging. So I think that we answered all the questions here on the board, and now it's time. We were absolutely in time. It's time to close the session for today. Thank you very much to Mathis, our brewing specialist, and we hope that you enjoyed this presentation from Mathis, and also the answers he has given regarding the questions that was popping up. And thank you for this. It was fantastic. And let's come to the end now, and I have to mention here that after we close the seminar, you have the chance to give us a short feedback. In addition, you will also receive an email including a link to watch the recorded video of today's session, And that is what I mentioned before. That's maybe something that you have to do when you want to go a little bit deeper and to understand what Mattis said in between the lines of his presentation. So for us, finally, after a short winter break, we would like to start with our third webinar series of the Hoppy Topics. Again, we will keep you informed in time about the topics and the schedule on our website and by the well-known social media channels. I think that we will start around February, and we also want to pick up the topic that Paolo strived with his question regarding non-alcoholic beers and dry hopping. That's very important and very interesting for us as well. So thank you for joining our webinar today, and we hope you enjoyed the time with us, and we look forward to seeing you again in a hopefully better new year. And please stay healthy. So have a good time, have a good Christmas, have a good start in the new year, and thank you and bye-bye.